So next, I want you to pick from one of two stories, either Recitatif by Toni Morrison or The Cooking Lesson by Rosario Castellanos. Okay, and let me first talk a little bit about Recitatif. It's in the first person again. They're all in the first person, but this time the first person is the main character, or one of two main characters in this story. So yeah, and another thing about this story, you'll read this. Oh, did I give you the introduction? I may not have. I didn't give you the introduction to Toni Morrison. Well, what it says, maybe I'll double check. But one of the things it says is that she was trying something in this story, and that is the two main characters. One of them is black and one of them is white, but she never specifies which is which, and so she's sort of challenging notions of racial stereotypes by forcing us as a reader to try to decide which one is black and which one is white. So that might be something to keep an eye on as you read it. And you know, what do you think about that? You know, so there's that. Another important thing about it is that there are time shifts in the story. You could say, and she doesn't mark those. So one thing I would do if I were you is I would, as you go through the story and you find where those time shifts happen, is that you mark them. And I thought I marked them, and now I can't find where I marked them. But anyway, let's get started. Let me just read a little bit. Okay, Recitatif, which is already a weird title. And these stories are going to be a little bit more challenging. That's okay. We're in college, so I expect you to be challenged. I expect you not to, to struggle a little bit with these stories, but to get into them as well. Recitatif is a word from opera. It's the part of the opera where they kind of talk rather than sing. Something like that. So why did she title it that? But anyway, let me just start. My mother danced all night, and Roberta's was sick. That's why we were taken to St. Bonnie's. And then you got to look. It has a little 2, and you want to look down. A fictional orphanage. So they're at a state orphanage. We find out. And sort of the idea of that first sentence, having read it already, one of the things when you read these stories is you have to be willing to read without really knowing what everything means right at the beginning. It's sort of like starting on a journey and not quite knowing the roads and things, but as you keep driving, things start to make sense. So what it means is her mom danced all night, which means she wasn't a very good mother because she wasn't around. She was at the bars partying or something. And this other girl, who's going to be the other main character, Roberta, her mother was sick, so that's a problem. Sick, can't remember if it's physically sick or mentally sick. I have to review that. So anyway, that's why we were taken to St. Bonnie's. People want to put their arms around you when you tell them you were in the shelter, but it really wasn't bad. No big long room with 100 beds like Bellevue, another famous orphanage. There were 4 to a room, and when Roberta, or group home, whatever you want to call it. There were 4 to a room. And when Roberta and me came, there was a shortage of state kids. And it gives you a note on that. Children that the state had put into the orphanage. Oh, it's a Catholic orphanage. It's not a state orphanage, but they take state, whatever you want, kids that the state puts there. St. Bonnie's. Yeah, okay. Saint. So it's a Catholic origin. So we were the only ones assigned to room 406 and could go from bed to bed if we wanted to. And we wanted to, too. We changed beds every night, and for the whole 4 months we were there, we never picked one out as our own permanent bed. So I guess you could say, for one thing, that's sort of an orientation. Is it an abstract? I don't know. I don't think so, but maybe it's an orientation, though. It puts us where they are, right, in this Catholic orphanage. And it introduces us to the 2 main characters there. Now, as you read, you'll get to a point where it's kind of, I'll just show you where the first one is. We get on the bottom of page 1177, and it says, Roberta left in May when the apple trees were heavy and white. Okay, on the bottom of 1177. And then on 1178, we have, with no apparent break right here, it starts a paragraph that says, I was working behind the counter at the Howard Johnson's on the thruway just before the Kingston exit. Well, boom, this is several years have passed, because in the first part they're like, I don't know, 8 years old or something, 7 or 8 years old, I'm not sure. And now she's grown or a young adult working at the Howard Johnsons. So what I would do there is I would put, like a line or something, and then after I'm done, I actually went through and numbered the sections as I found them. So one thing you want to be on the lookout for is those places where suddenly the narrative jumps and where we've passed several years and we're in a new situation. And I'll tell you a little bit about the story just to help you out, is that, again, in each case, in each one of those chapters, if you will, that you'll find, and by the way, you could even give yourself a little note here to say what the setting or situation is there. So in each one of those, again, she meets Roberta. Okay, so it's sort of her story of her and Roberta over the years is one way of looking at it as they get older after this first encounter in the orphanage. And there was one more thing I wanted to say. Oh, yeah. So you might be able to look at each one of these chapters as a mini story. And this is true of long form, like novels. We can think of each chapter as each one have like its own orientation, abstract, and so forth. So you might think about that as you're reading through that one, if you pick that one, because you can choose to either read the Toni Morrison story, Recitatif, or you can read the cooking lesson, and one or the other of those will be the basis of numbers 2 and 3 on your journal entry. Okay, and in the cooking lesson, this in some ways may be the most challenging story, but it's interesting, and it is also in the first person. Okay, the main character is talking, and here there's two challenges, especially I think. One is the vocabulary. She uses a lot of big words, and there's almost a reason for that, and I'm going to kind of give it away now. She never says, I was educated and I went to college and I'm from an upper class family, et cetera, et cetera. She never outright says that, but we can tell from her references and her vocabulary. We can even maybe guess what she studied in college. I think maybe she studied, among other things, philosophy or logic. Like on the second page, she uses these fancy words, prolegomena and propedeutic, right in the middle. And I circle the fancy words there, which are words from like Aristotelian logic, okay? First page, she uses the word pulchritude, which means kind of sexy, actually. So she uses a big vocabulary. And don't let that slow you down. Circle the vocabulary words. I wouldn't look every single one up. You can understand everything without looking up every little vocabulary word. Then maybe when you're done or when you pause, you can look some of them up. Some of them you don't really need to know, like prolegomena or propedeutic. I wouldn't even worry about those really wild ones. But okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is that this one, again, I'm kind of helping you out, has two simultaneous threads in it. On the one hand, in some paragraphs or even sections, she's talking about cooking this piece of meat and the challenges she has cooking this piece of meat. She's evidently, again, I'm giving you a little bit, from my reading of the story, it appears that she's never cooked really. Again, that ties back to her upbringing, maybe in an upper class Mexico City family, I'm not sure. And then sort of woven into that is her memory of her getting married and being with her husband. So I'll just give you an example. I won't actually start at the very beginning. I'll just start at the bottom of the second page, okay? So she says, I open the refrigerator drawer that proclaims meat. So here she is working on trying to cook this piece of meat and extract a package that I cannot recognize under its icy coating. I thaw it in hot water, revealing the title without which I never would have identified the contents. Fancy beef broil. Wonderful. A plain and wholesome dish. But since it doesn't mean resolving an antinomy or proposing an axiom, it doesn't appeal to me. Okay, there's why I think she studied logic or philosophy in college, because antinomy and axiom are like words from Aristotelian logic or from logic, okay? So, in fact, she keeps on going. Moreover, it's not simply an excess of logic that inhibits my hunger. It's also the appearance of it being the meat. Frozen stiff, it's the color that shows now that I've ripped open the package. Red, as if it were just about to start bleeding. And then the next paragraph, seemingly out of nowhere, is this. Our backs were that same color, my husband and I, after our orgiastic sunbathing on the beaches of Acapulco. Orgiastic, and like from an orgy? I don't know exactly. I don't think it exactly was an orgy after you read it. But so boom, suddenly we're sunbathing in Acapulco. So there's a shift there, and her husband, could afford the luxury of quote, behaving like the man he is and stretch out face down to avoid rubbing his painful skin. But I, self-sacrificing little Mexican wife, born like a dove to the nest, smiled like Cuauhtemoc, and I think that's one of the early Aztec kings that then maybe Cortez tortured. I need to double check that one. Cuauhtemoc under torture on the rack when he said, "My bed is not made of roses." That is he. Let me read that one again. But I, self-sacrificing little Mexican wife, born like a dove to the nest, smiled like Cuauhtemoc under torture on the rack when he, that is her husband, said, "My bed is not made of roses," and fell silent. Face up, I bore not only my own weight, but also his on top of me. So I think they're having sex. You find out that later down she was a virgin, so this is the first time she had sex. The classic position for making love. And I moaned from the tearing and the pleasure, the classic moan. Myth, M-Y-T-H-S. Okay? And then it goes on, and then further down, it will switch back to the meat. So she's going back and forth between cooking the meat and thinking about her marriage in general. And right there, as an experienced reader, I think, well, in a way, then cooking the meat is somehow symbolic of her whole marriage. She goes ahead and burns the meat, I'll tell you that. Okay, so there. Those are some things that will help you with those stories. So you're going to pick either Recitatif or the cooking lesson to write numbers 2 and 3 about. Especially number 2. And what I want you to do on number 2 is to pretend like you are this person. Pretend like you're the narrator of this story or the narrator of the Toni Morrison story. And I want you to pretend, so this is kind of creative. I want you to pretend that you meet somebody somewhere, another friend, and you tell them this story or this story. But now you've got to do it in about 250 or 300 words, and I want you to do it as if you were talking. And as you retell the story, which in other words, in a sense, you're going to be summarizing the story, but you're doing it in the sense of retelling it as if it were an oral story. And I want you, as you're doing that, to see if you can put in the 6 elements of Labob. You know, give it an abstract, give it an orientation, give it a complicating action. And that means you got to try to figure out whether those are in the story that you originally read and how you can sort of turn those into a narrative. So that's what I want you to try. And then in 3, you'll reflect on how successful you were and how it went. Okay? So that's an introduction to the stories. Give yourself time to read them, especially Recitatif and Cooking Lesson, whichever one of those you read, are, to get through them because they're literary. They're a little stepping up a bit. It's going to take some focus and some time to work your way through it. Read with a pen or pencil if you can print them up or highlight or take notes. All right, I'll stop there. Okay, have a good one, everybody. Take care.